What's top of your worry list?
I think the world is coming to terms with the fact that inflation will be higher longer term, something I'm convinced about. And that's probably kind of putting the overall, worry about how's this going to work, how's the timing going to work. And we have this restart dynamic where we still have all these supply chain issues that are creating all kinds of strange short-term effects. So I think those are the two factors that are putting this into kind of more worrying context.
But so is inflation sticky now? Is it higher than actually we think it is and for longer? Or do you still believe the central banks that for the moment it's transitory, but maybe deeper in the longer term?
I think it's probably the wrong frame to sort of ask whether it's transitory or persistent. It's really both, in the sense that, we're going to have this restart dynamic that means we're going to have very high inflation for the next 12 to 18 months. But I think the key point is inflation will settle at a higher level than what we've been used to the last couple of decades. And that's something the market has to come to terms with and get used to. And by the way, it's what the central banks want. So I think in some ways it's what we're seeing is this strategy of makeup, of putting inflation higher than the usual target. That's what's happening.
But the central banks are also at pains in saying we taper, but we're not raising rates.
Yeah.
So is that a misnomer? Actually, should the market start repricing for possible interest rates rises sooner than we think?
No, I don't think so. I think with the exception perhaps of the Bank of England, the central banks have been very clear that raising rates is not on the agenda anytime soon. And I think the tapering, frankly, is not the big story. We should sort of almost see through that, ignore it. The real issue will be at what point do you have to adjust the interest rates so that you don't unanchor long-term inflation expectations. That's going to be the key challenge. How do you get inflation to be higher than what we're used to without triggering something that you don't want in terms of loosening inflation, long-term inflation expectations?
That could come when? Mid next year?
I think I'd be hard-pressed to see any real action on interest rates next year, perhaps with the exception of the Bank of England. So I think we're looking at early 2023 as the kind of lift off at this stage, right? Now, you never know what happens until then, but that would be the baseline scenario.